Today I'm going to be talking about something a little more off the cuff and just something I wanted to get off my chest, and I'm experimenting with a slightly looser format for some of these videos, so this is an example of that. The other day I was talking to somebody who was feeling pretty inadequate about their writing. They're a fantasy author, and they would brand themselves as such. And there was a lot of talk in the vein of how they don't measure up and they didn't feel like they could compete. And I said, you know, don't ever compare yourselves to others. And the response that I got was, well, how can I not do that? How can I not compare myself to others? I have to know how I stack up. I have to know, whether I'm any good. And that's always a tough one to argue with, because who else are you going to compare yourself to? And the answer I've had to that over the years has turned out to be, you compare yourself to what you were once upon a time, because that's the fairest comparison that you can make. And every time you compare yourself to other people, you're doing both yourself and the other person, assuming that both of you are engaged in the same kind of creative activity, assuming that, all of the things are equal. Every time you do this, you're basically doing both of you a disservice. And what happens is that when you compare yourself to another creator, when you're down there, somewhere in the gutter, and you're looking up at this other person up in the stars, what's happening is that it becomes impossible to see you and that other person ever sitting down and sharing a table together. And it means that you are going to automatically feel intimidated by everything that they are and everything that they do. It makes dialogue impossible. And I don't mean dialogue even in the sense of, like I said, sitting down at a table and talking to the other person, but in the sense of looking at their work and learning from it as if it was a peer instead of as somebody all the way up in the firmament. If you allow honest debate about the work that other people have made to level out the playing field a little bit, it gets easier to deal with other people as peers, to see them as fellow creators instead of as someone that you could never reach in a million years. Because it's entirely possible for those people, all the way up in the stratosphere, it's entirely possible for them to be doing the wrong thing. And by the wrong thing, I mean it may be entirely possible that the way they are doing things is not the model for you to follow. It may be a model, it may be an inspiration, but you shouldn't regard it as being the only thing or the best thing, because then you lose sight of the things that only you can do, that things that only you can bring to the table, whatever those are. And those are the most important things that you have to discover as a creator, is what you uniquely have to bring to the table, not who should I follow or, who should I model myself after. So when you do this, it becomes possible for you to be able to look at them and to dissent from them a little bit, to say, yes, I think that what they're doing is good. I think that they have some tremendously valid contribution to make to to science fiction and fantasy generally, but that doesn't mean that they're absolutely correct at all times. It doesn't mean that they're the thing that I need to become. You don't need to become anything except the best version of yourself. And that is difficult, but it's a lot easier to do that than to model yourself exclusively after somebody else. So you don't compare yourself to others if only for the sake of making things equal between you and the other. It gives both of you a chance to stand on better footing together. And I see this a lot with people who are trying to get into writing SF and fantasy. They get very intimidated by their idols. And some of that, I think, also comes down to commercialism. Like they'll see what's out in theaters and they'll say to themselves, God, how can I ever produce anything that would ever measure up to that? And you have to remember, these people have hundreds of millions of dollars at their disposal. They don't have one writer on there. They have dozens. And they're all working, side by side to write the best possible one-liners, the best possible action scenes, and all the rest of it. That's not something to compete with. That's something to draw, wherever you can, individual specific lessons from, but they are not things that you want to emulate. They're not happening at your level. Don't try to be at that level. It's not going to help you. And the other hard thing, I think, is that it's really hard for us to swallow the idea that the people that we want to pattern ourselves after are, at the end of the day, just people. Everyone who's been following, for instance, the controversy about Neil Gaiman will understand this on a gut level. These are human beings. They're fallible. They aren't God. And if you hold someone in esteem, you have to be willing to see all the ways that they are not only wrong, but flawed. And this is not just about them being, nice people or not nice people. It's that nobody is going to have a monopoly on the truth the way you see it. Everybody's ideas are necessarily provisional. The writers that I love most dearly, I don't love because they wrote something that I can't ever find fault with. I can sit down with 10 of my favorite books with a red pen, and I can find all kinds of things in them that I don't agree with, that I don't like. I wouldn't have done it this way. I think this is a mistake, that kind of thing. I can do that with anybody. But I don't love them because they're perfect. I love them because they showed me something new. I love them because they made a case for what they were doing in a way that nobody else could. And to the degree that I have been able to do my own thing, independent of those inspirations, I have tried. I haven't always succeeded, but it's very necessary to do that. It's very necessary to see these things as starting points, not as destinations. That everybody that you idolize is someone that you have to eventually free yourself from. Because if you don't, you never get to do you. So I don't venerate perfection because I don't think it actually exists. I venerate people and works that show me a new way, that open things up a bit. I think that's the most important thing to look for is, how can this show me something that I haven't seen before, really get me thinking? And all this plays into something else that came back to mind just this past week. My wife and I went to see Princess Mononoke, Hayao Miyazaki's animated epic from Studio Ghibli. We saw it in the theaters in IMAX during its revival. By the way, it looks fantastic that way. If you're still able to catch it, go see it. It's incredible in a theater. And I remember hearing all of these discussions when Miyazaki was talking about retiring at various points in his career, about who was going to be the next Miyazaki. And I said, I find all of these kinds of discussions ultimately meaningless, because the whole point is that there is no next Miyazaki. He was only going to do his thing. If anybody else was going to come after him and maybe take cues from him, they could only ever be themselves either. There are individual directors I've seen who have been trumpeted as people who are, picking up where he left off. But to talk about them as the next Miyazaki has always struck me as being a complete mistake. So we can't think of creators as models in any sense. We can't think of them as things that we're trying to consciously pattern ourselves after. That's always a mistake. Because, again, you end up in this awkward position of trying to be something that at the end of the day, you really aren't. And you deprive yourself of the ability to really draw on the things that are exclusive to you, that are personalized, individuated. That I bring up that word a lot in these discussions. It's harder to look inwards at the things that only you have than it is to look outwards at what other people have already put out there. It's always harder, but it's much more important. Anyway, this I know has rambled a little bit, but I hope it's of use. And in the future, I'm going to try to polish this kind of stuff more. But I think I like where this came out, and I do want to see what you think. Thanks.